I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, as we begin what's now day 6 of the catastrophic fires in Southern California. The situation is still extremely volatile and therefore still very dangerous. The death toll stands at 16, with 150,000 residents under evacuation orders. The long-term impact on Californians' health and damage done to the environment are incalculable. The cost to rebuild in California, which boasts the largest economy in America, are impossible to tally at this point. The causes for the individual fires are under investigation, but scientists say there's no question that climate change exacerbated the factors leading to these cataclysmic events. The two big fires, the coastal Palisades fire and the inland Eaton fires, are still raging, and the National Weather Service has cited red flag wind warnings in the Southern California area through at least Wednesday. We begin with the very latest from our Jonathan Vigliotti.
More than 14,000 personnel from all over California, 9 states, as well as Canada and Mexico, have mobilized to the bone-dry hills of Los Angeles, battling 4 active and sprawling wildfires menacing millions of people across the region. The massive Palisades fire, the largest in the city, has grown to nearly 25,000 acres, destroying an estimated 75% of Pacific Palisades. Officials say that 1/3 of the eastern edge of Malibu has been destroyed too. The Palisades fire now threatens nearby Brentwood and Encino, where additional evacuation orders have been issued. A brief break in the wind allowed aircraft to gain 11% containment Saturday as the region was bombarded with water and flame retardant. But planes were briefly grounded after drones were spotted in the airspace. In Altadena, the Eaton fire has destroyed more than 14,000 acres and reduced thousands of homes to ash. That fire is now 27% contained. Officials say the rash of fires have burned through more than 40,000 acres and more than 12,000 structures have been destroyed, a city under siege. LA Mayor Karen Bass is now facing calls to resign from a growing number of people who say the city's response was inadequate.
My question to you is, what explains this lack of preparation and rapid response?
When we are safe, when lives have been saved and homes have been saved, we will absolutely do an evaluation.
Her own fire chief has said budget cuts hampered firefighting efforts.
We are screaming to be properly funded to make sure that our firefighters can do their jobs.
The cause of the fires are still under investigation, and the National Guard is on scene to prevent looting and enforce a nightly curfew.
And red flag warnings are back in effect. Wind gusts could exceed 50 miles per hour. Meanwhile, officials are preemptively cutting power in some neighborhoods to prevent more fires from sparking, Margaret.
Jonathan Vigliotti reporting from Pacific Palisades. Stay safe and thank you. We turn now to FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Good morning, Margaret.
These Santa Ana winds are forecast to continue into the next week, and that could fuel some of the blazes. What is your biggest area of concern right now?
You know, with these winds coming back and them issuing the red flag warnings, you know, these winds change the dynamics of this fire. And so I'm concerned for the safety of our firefighters, concerned for their ability to continue to contain this fire. And I want people to make sure that they are listening closely to what local officials are saying so they can stay safe and they can stay out of harm's way.
So I know the winds themselves are rare for this particular time of year, but Los Angeles and the area, they got a lot of experience with wildfires. They have a lot of regulation and a large firefighting force. Do you have a sense at this point why the area was so unprepared?
I think that they were very prepared. This is something that they are very used to. They fight fires all the time, but they have never seen 100-mile-an-hour winds that are fueling the fire. And those winds and that weather condition is what really impacts, you know, where this fire is going to go, but more importantly, how they're able to try to contain it in those first few hours and days. And because it was in such a populated area, it just makes it that much more challenging to be able to get in there and secure the perimeter, but as well try to save as many homes as possible.
In terms of the federal response and the support you're giving to local authorities, President Biden spoke a few times from the Oval Office this week, and he did mention the need to move power lines underground. Do you know, were the power lines a cause of any of these blazes?
Yeah, I don't have any information on the cause, and I think that's certainly going to be something that's going to be, under investigation. But I think when we think about moving the power lines underground, it's not just from the cause, but it's also how do you keep the power on when we have these severe weather incidents? When you underground them, you create a more resilient community, and it can withstand the impacts of all of these different types of storms, whether it's fires or hurricanes, and we want to be able to keep these communities energized.
Will that be a requirement for any federal support for the rebuild?
It's not going to be a requirement for us unless it's part of their local code, right? And we want to be able to enforce the local codes that they have. And so we'll work closely with California as also using this as an opportunity. Even if it's not a requirement, is this something that they want to be able to do? We have additional ways that we can fund that through our programs as they begin the rebuilding.
The governor has indicated he's looking at a number of executive orders. If local environmental regulations are loosened here in order to help quickly rebuild, does that concern you at all? And will it make it more complicated for people to obtain insurance, which we already know is quite expensive and hard for many Californians to get?
The insurance piece is a real concern. We've, heard the stories of so many people that have lost their insurance prior to this event, and that's the number one resource that families have to help with their rebuilding process. And so what I think we want to be able to do is we want to be able to work with the governor's team to rebuild in a way that makes communities more resilient, that keeps insurance companies there, right? That we rebuild in a way that makes them stronger and reducing the impact so they want to stay in these communities and they don't have to lose the insurance carriers. We have to be able to work together with the insurance industry to help find ways to keep this really valuable resource in place for so many families.
But many of these policies were already canceled months ago, as we've been reporting. So should the government, though, be in the business of stepping in and helping people rebuild if the private market has deemed these areas just too risky?
Our programs really help jumpstart the recovery process, but without insurance, families are going to have to find other means to be able to rebuild. But again, it's not necessarily just where you rebuild, it's going to be how. And we want to be able to do things that can encourage families to rebuild their homes in a way that make them more fire resistant. We have a lot of science and technology out there that shows ways that we can make these homes stronger and more resistant against these fires. That's really where we need to focus our efforts as we move into the rebuilding phase.
President Biden said that 100% of the firefighting costs will be picked up for 6 months on the federal tab. But there is the separate issue of individual assistance to victims who lost their homes. We checked, and Congress set the maximum FEMA grant level at just short of $44,000. It's very expensive living in California. Does that need to be raised? Should Congress do that?
So again, our programs aren't designed to replace insurance. Our programs are designed to jumpstart the recovery process. And we know that in many areas, not just California, that that is not going to be enough to rebuild a home, which is why insurance is so important. We'll work with other partners, and one of our greatest partners is the Small Business Administration that can do low interest loans to these families to give them another resource to help rebuild. We'll also work with our nonprofit partners, philanthropic partners, bringing the whole society together so we can work with each family to help them figure out the right tools that they're going to need and the decisions that they're going to have to make as they go down this recovery journey.
You're describing a really costly enterprise here. I've seen estimates on damages that range from $60 to $130 billion. Do you have any ballpark figure at this point? Because it would seem, according to President Biden, that Congress is going to have to do more.
Yeah, I don't have any good estimates right now, and I think it's important to remember that these fires are still burning, which means damage is still happening. But the cost for this disaster, both from just the physical infrastructure, but also the economic losses, they're going to be significant. There's going to be other programs that Congress can work through, like HUD's Community Development Block Grant for Disaster Program, that can also help cover some of the things that FEMA's programs don't cover, or other parts of the insurance industry. There's a wide variety of different tools and resources that can be used that need to be authorized by Congress to really help this community on this road to recovery.
Well, we appreciate you joining us today to get the message out, Administrator Criswell. Good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we turn now to California Democratic Congresswoman Judy Chu. Part of her district has been impacted by the Eaton fire, and she joins us from the Pasadena Convention Center, currently sheltering more than 500 local residents. Good morning to you, Congresswoman. I know 11 of these reported deaths were in your community. How are you, and do you know if the community is out of the danger zone at this point?
It is not out of the danger zone. We have another Santa Ana gust of winds that will happen Monday or Tuesday. They will be around 50 miles per hour. That is less than what caused this whole terrible catastrophe. Last week, the winds were between 80 to 100 miles per hour. Nonetheless, they could spread the fire, and I urge all residents to pay attention to the evacuation warnings and orders, and most of all, to make sure that they are safe.
Well, I understand that there were water pressure issues in the Altadena area. There was no local police or fire department. You all rely on the county for that kind of resource. Do you think, going forward, does this need to change? Have you talked to the governor?
We have been in touch with the governor, but what I want to do is to assure people that there is enough water. And in fact, the fire department agencies have assured me that there is enough. But when the fires first happened, there was a combination of drastic winds and the fire. And as a result, they were overwhelmed. This is not an ordinary incident. And many fire hydrants were going on at the same time, and also the electricity used to pump the water had been turned off so that there would not spark any more fires. So that happened at that point, but I believe that we're in a good place right now.
I imagine a lot of the people in that shelter behind you are just wondering when they'll be able to go and see what's left of their neighborhoods. The state of California, as we understand it, put a moratorium Thursday on insurers dropping Californians from coverage. But it raises these questions of, are these communities going to be rebuilt, and should they be rebuilt?
These communities have to be rebuilt. I have the beautiful areas of Altadena and Pasadena, and these were vibrant communities, diverse communities with so much historic value behind them. People love these areas, and we need to make sure that there are the resources possible for them to rebuild their homes, as well as the incredible small businesses that are here. So this is why, after I took the tour of the devastated areas with our FEMA administrator, I decided to arrange for a tour of our California Congress members, which took place just yesterday, so that they could see the devastation for themselves. We need to make sure that Congress is ready to provide the help that's needed to rebuild these areas like Altadena and Pasadena.
One of your Republican colleagues went on Fox, Congressman Warren Davidson, and said he'd oppose having an open checkbook approach to a place that, no matter how bad your policies are, would be crazy, he said. It sounds like he wants strings attached to further aid. Have you talked to Republican leadership? Have you talked to Speaker Johnson yet about coming to California?
We are planning to invite Speaker Johnson as well as President Trump to come to this area and to witness the devastation for themselves. We have already been in touch with Republican Congress members, and they have expressed that they are very open to coming and seeing what is going on. You know, these wildfires don't have any political affiliation. They don't belong to any political party. This devastation has affected thousands upon thousands of people who just ran out of their homes with nothing in their hands and are trying to rebuild, and they need help.
So in terms of that help, first they have to figure out if their insurance covers anything. Then they can go to the federal government for help. But FEMA has a grant limit of $44,000. It's Congress that set that limit. Does that need to be raised? And are you hearing from your constituents that they are getting help? They're able to access these resources?
Well, first of all, I want to say that FEMA is opening a local assistance center on Tuesday, and anybody can walk in or call and get the assistance that they need. Actually, there are temporary locations, too, happening even today and tomorrow at the local libraries. FEMA is also here at this Pasadena Convention Center, and so there are many ways in which people can get help. Of course, what we are encouraging everybody to do is to sign up on disasterassistance.gov immediately to get the process going. Of course, they will have to have their insurance information available.
And we will see if raising the amount of assistance or what changes to assistance are made in the coming weeks and months. Congresswoman Chu, thank you, and we wish you and your community the best of luck.
Thank you.
And if you at home want to help those affected by the wildfires, CBS is partnering with the American Red Cross, which is staffing evacuation centers and providing supplies to people forced out of their homes. To donate, go to redcross.org/CBS. And we'll be back in 1 minute with a lot more Face the Nation. On Tuesday, the Senate begins consideration of several of the president-elect's national security nominees. Our Scott Pelley sat down with outgoing FBI Director Christopher Wray for tonight's 60 Minutes and talked to him about the challenges facing the new national security team. Here's a preview of Scott's interview and one threat that's been of particular concern to Director Wray.
China's cyber program is by far and away the world's largest, bigger than that of every major nation combined, and has stolen more of Americans' personal and corporate data than that of every nation, big or small, combined. But even beyond the cyber theft, there's another part of the Chinese cyber threat that I think has not gotten the attention publicly that it, I think, desperately deserves, and that is Chinese government's pre-positioning on American civilian critical infrastructure to lie in wait on those networks, to be in a position to wreak havoc and can inflict real-world harm at a time and place of their choosing.
The Chinese have already insinuated malware into critical American infrastructure.
That's correct.
Like what?
Things like water treatment plants. We're talking about transportation systems. We're talking about targeting of our energy sector, the electric grid, natural gas pipelines. And recently, we've seen targeting of our telecommunications system.
And you can see more from Scott Pelley's interview with Director Wray tonight on 60 Minutes at 7 p.m. Eastern. We turn now to the number 2 Republican in the Senate, Wyoming's John Barrasso. He joins us this morning from Casper, Wyoming. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Thank you, Margaret.
There's a busy week ahead in the Senate, but before I get to that business, I do want to ask you about these fires in California. Do you expect that Congress will have to provide an additional aid package, and if so, when?
Well, what we're seeing is heartbreaking. It's horrible, affecting people, old and young, rich and poor, everyone in the Wyoming National Guard is there on the scene, helping with manpower as well as equipment. when you see what's being shown on television, in addition to the tragedy on the ground, you're also seeing gross mismanagement in California by elected officials. And it's heartbreaking to hear the fire chief say that they've diverted all of this money away from the fire department to be used for social programs when they were already stretched too thin. So, yes, I expect there's going to be hearings. There's going to be requests of Congress. There can't be a blank check on this, however, because people want to make sure that as rebuilding occurs, as things go on in California, they have to be resilient so that these sorts of things can't happen again. And the policies of the liberal administration out there, I believe, have made these fires worse.
Do you expect, though, that Congress and Republicans will still help these Americans in need, even if they don't like their local politics and the party?
I expect that there will be strings attached to money that is ultimately approved, and it has to do with being ready the next time, because this was a gross failure this time.
Senator, let me move on to what's happening this week, because you are the whip, you are the vote counter. You are watching very closely what these hearings for these picks made by Donald Trump will be like. Starting Tuesday, 13 of the picks are going to be up for questioning. Leader Thune told us last Sunday he suspects a lot will get through, but we'll see about all of them. Which nominees are you certain will be confirmed by January 20th?
Well, let's start with, we were elected. Republicans are now in the House, the Senate, and the White House because Americans wanted safety and prosperity. So you're right. The rubber hits the road this week with all of these hearings on the cabinet. And then when President Trump takes office next Monday, there is going to be shock and awe with executive orders, a blizzard of executive orders on the economy as well as on the border. So when we met with President Trump just earlier this past week, what President Trump said the number one goal for the Senate needs to be to get his team in place. I've met with just about all of them. I support every one of these nominees. As the whip, my job is to make sure they get across the finish line, get on the job, and President Trump deserves a team early. Chuck Schumer said he wants to make fireworks at the hearings. If that happens, we are going to work around the clock, through the night, through weekends, to make sure we get that cabinet confirmed.
Well, I want to ask you about some of those picks on the other side of this commercial break and how many of them will sail through, since you do have the Republican majority and enough votes to do this without Democratic help. We'll talk about those specifics in a moment. Stay with us through this break.
Portion of Face the Nation is brought to you by Charles Schwab. Own your tomorrow.
Coming up in our next half hour, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. His new project is Journey to America, a PBS documentary profiling several famous immigrants and their contributions to America, like the late diplomat Henry Kissinger, who fled Germany in 1938.
And the circumstances that I had known were a dictatorship that was persecuting people of my ethnic background.
We'll talk with the former speaker about that, politics, and get his thoughts on President-elect Trump's plans for immigration reform. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation now with Wyoming Republican Senator John Barrasso. Senator, you are the whip. You count the votes. Does Pete Hegseth, the pick to run the Pentagon, have them?
Well, he certainly has the qualities that we need to lead the Pentagon. He knows about a fit fighting force. He is very qualified, in my opinion. He has a distinguished record of service in the military. Every senator gets to speak for themselves, and they will do that. The meetings have gone very well. Things are heading in the right direction. The hearings start Tuesday, and they're going to be consequential. People will listen and make their own decision. People have already had chances to ask questions, and they're going to continue to do so. I expect he's going to have quality answers to the questions that they ask.
Well, your colleague, Senator Joni Ernst, who is a sexual assault survivor herself, did say last month that she wanted the FBI to vet the claims against Mr. Hegseth that were made by an accuser who said that he raped her. He denies that that assault happened. He claims it was consensual sex, despite her filing of that police report. She also asked that the results be presented to the committee. Is that FBI vetting being shared with members of the Armed Services Committee?
Well, Joni is a warrior. She is a patriot. I know she's had a chance to meet with the nominee at least twice. And advice and consent is about giving advice as well as asking consent. She's going to ask additional questions at the hearing on Tuesday and will ultimately make her decision. With regard to the FBI report, it's reported today that the chairman and the ranking member of the committee have seen the report already. Traditionally, those reports do not get shared with the other members of the committee. That goes back 4 decades, back when, John McCain was chairman of the committee, and I support the chairman in that decision.
Well, that's why it is so notable that such a prominent member and other senators are asking to see FBI vetting. Do you prefer that the details of that sexual assault be disclosed in a public hearing, or would you support that those private investigative details be shared with members at the discretion of the chairman?
Well, the chairman is going to make that decision, and I support the chairman. I also support Pete Hegseth. If you take a look at the current nominee compared to who's been in the Pentagon the last 4 years, where they had a woke military, where recruitment went down, morale went down, I think Pete is going to be terrific in terms of recruitment, in terms of morale, in terms of returning America to a fighting force, which is what the American people really want. They want to make sure if our military is called upon, they're ready to go, that they're ready to fight, and that with intimidating power.
Okay. Just to correct myself, alleged sexual assault. So let me ask you about another nominee or nominee to be, one to run the intelligence community and oversee all the agencies. It appears the only member of Mr. Trump's national security team that doesn't have a real scheduled hearing is Tulsi Gabbard. Is it the FBI background check that's holding things up, or is it the ethics disclosure that's a problem?
I support Tulsi Gabbard. She is amazing in that she has been a member of Congress and a combat veteran, a decorated combat veteran for work under fire in Iraq. You're right, it's a paperwork problem right now with the Office of Government Ethics. We had hoped to have the hearing later this week. It looks like it's going to be the following week. But look, she continues to have promotions in the military. She's a lieutenant colonel. She now has top-level security clearances. She's the right person to keep America secure and safe.
She took the unusual measure of releasing a public statement reversing some past policy positions she'd taken when it came to surveillance. Are you concerned that you don't have enough Republicans who are willing to vote for her?
I'm not concerned at all about that. Senator Tom Cotton, who's chairman of the Intelligence Committee, has met with her on numerous occasions. She will have a hearing. She has to raise her right hand, take an oath at the time. She will be telling the truth. And the issue that you just raised, which is foreign surveillance, she is now the mind and the position that is consistent with the chairman of the committee and Republican members of the committee.
You mentioned shock and awe on day one of Mr. Trump's new term with executive orders. But some of this action is also going to require congressional help. This week, President Biden banned new offshore oil and gas drilling in 625 meters of the ocean, miles. Are you going to reverse that in that first reconciliation bill that Leader Thune told us about?
Well, what President Biden just did by executive order, I expect that President Trump will eliminate with executive orders as well. In terms of the reconciliation bill, we need results. The results are what matter. We were sent here, and President Trump says he doesn't care if it's 1 bill, 2 bills, 3 bills. He wants the results as we are united on securing the border, on bringing down costs for American citizens. Across the board, we want to make sure that tax cuts don't expire. We want to make sure that the country is safe and strong. Those are the issues that the American people elected us to do. That's what we're here to do.
Just to follow up there, Mr. Trump has said one big, beautiful bill is what he wants. It seems procedural, but we know from the Senate side, you would prefer 2 different reconciliation bills at 2 different times to tackle some of these big agenda items. When you hear that the Speaker of the House says it's got to be one because he can only get one thing through, doesn't that underscore just how difficult unified Republican leadership is actually going to be?
No, results matter, and we're united with the results. And when President Trump met with us for a couple of hours, the senators this past week, he said, I don't care how many bills, we just want to get it done. There are urgent needs that I'd like to get addressed immediately. You take a look at what happened this week in the Senate. There was actually bipartisanship because the first bill that we brought to the Senate floor, the Laken Riley bill, was about a wonderful young woman, 22, a nursing student in Georgia who was out for a jog. Yeah. Brutally murdered by an illegal immigrant, somebody who was a criminal in this country, should have either been in jail or deported, but he was done. Neither of those were done under the Biden administration. We had bipartisan support now, even though Chuck Schumer blocked that bill last year.
And we're going to talk about that with one of the Democratic senators who supported it later on in the program. Senator Barrasso, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be right back. We turn now to Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, who joins us from Tucson, Arizona. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning, Margaret.
It's going to be a very busy week in the Senate. Before I get to those confirmation hearings, I want to follow up on what the FBI director told our Scott Pelley there in describing some of the Chinese hacking and what incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz called cyber time bombs throughout U.S. infrastructure. What needs to happen? What do the consequences need to be for China having done this and remaining in our infrastructure?
Well, we've got to be strong in standing up to them and explaining to them, and in some cases, I think consequences need to be serious. There are things that we can do. We have the tools. But I would say even beyond that, we've got to figure out a way to get them off of the infrastructure. With regards to the telecom system, multiple companies, Chinese cyber software are currently on those systems, and we're working to try to fix this. Some of this is going to require that the telecom companies upgrade their infrastructure. That could be costly. We're currently working with them to do that.
It's pretty incredible that this espionage happened in the first place, and expelling them is so hard to do. I want to also ask you about another Chinese question, and that has to do with TikTok, because the attorney for the company said they will go dark next Sunday unless the Supreme Court intervenes and stops this national security law from taking effect or delays it, as Mr. Trump has asked the court to do. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, based on the oral argument in the case 2 days ago, it looks like the Supreme Court, I mean, I don't really want to speculate, but it does look like they're going to uphold the law that we passed. So I think on the 19th, so one day before the inauguration, TikTok on our systems, on our servers, becomes something that's now been banned by Congress. So I imagine there's going to be a disruption in the service here, starting on the 19th. I know this is controversial. I know there are folks out there that earn a living, on TikTok, but it has a national security risk to it. One is the data. One of the risks, the thing that I'm more concerned about, is their ability to manipulate the population of the United States, especially in time of a conflict. So it was the right decision. I voted for it, and it looks like the Supreme Court is going to uphold the legislation that we passed.
We'll track that story. I want to follow up on something Senator Barrasso brought up, which was the Laken-Riley Act. You say you support this. It's a bill that would require federal authorities to detain undocumented immigrants charged with theft-related crimes rather than releasing them on parole. This bill was introduced last Congress, didn't go anywhere. Was it wrong for Democrats not to take it up? Was it election year politics that made Democrats concerned about bringing it forward?
Well, in the last year, we've been working with Republicans on bipartisan border security, legislation with the hope of getting that passed and then moving on to comprehensive immigration reform. I think we could do that. I think there's a lot of, there's an effort. I think that's going to continue. Right now, this is certainly bipartisan. I voted for cloture on the, motion to start talking about it.
But do you regret not doing that, taking that position earlier? If Democrats were more muscular on this issue, which was such a live issue during the campaign?
Well, I mean, the Lake and Riley Act is very specific. I mean, it does one specific thing. We were working on something that was much more comprehensive, money for Border Patrol agents and hiring and infrastructure, policy changes. And policy changes, you really have to do in a bipartisan way. We can't do that through the reconciliation process you were talking about. So there is, I think there's going to be an effort ongoing. This is bipartisan. You're right. We didn't do this a year ago. Maybe we should have, but we were working on bipartisan border security legislation. We weren't able to get that across the finish line. I hope we can do that in this Congress.
I want to get to two of the picks here. You sit on the Armed Services Committee. Typically, only the ranking and chairs of the committees get to see the FBI background check on a nominee. But as you know, many senators are asking for more information on Pete Hegseth here. Do you have any information from the ranking member of the committee, from Senator Reid, that you will get access or get any information from that FBI background check?
Margaret, let me just start by saying there is not a job that's more serious and more critical to our national security than Secretary of Defense, and we need a qualified individual in that job. And he just does not seem to have the qualifications. And then on top of that, you look at his personal conduct, especially when he was managing Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans of America. These two organizations were financially mismanaged. There was reports of being intoxicated on the job and creating an environment, where there was, some issues with, sexual harassment. So I think it's in the nominee, Mr. Hegseth's best interest, if he wants to be confirmed for this job, for us to have all the information. The information from these organizations, but also the FBI background check. Right now, as you say, the chairman and the ranking member are going to get it. That's an agreement with the White House. But there has been exceptions made in the past for certain nominees. This clearly, because it is bipartisan, like across the aisle, folks want to see the FBI background check. I think we should get an opportunity to take a look at it.
Okay. The New York Times was reporting that that the ranking member had been briefed as of Friday. You're saying no information has been shared?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think it will be before Tuesday?
Not yet.
When the hearing?
I don't know. I think, we will have an opportunity. I'll talk to the ranking member, and I also talked to the chairman about this, about his nomination in general. More so, the discussion I had with Roger Wicker was about just meeting with Mr. Hegseth. We've reached out to him multiple times, have not been able to schedule a meeting in my office, and he's not meeting with any other Democrats on the committee other than the ranking member. More information is better. If he wants to be confirmed for this job, I think it's in our best interest to have everything put out on the table.
You're on the Intelligence Committee. Former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard, she is controversial as well. Republican Senator Capito was on Fox today and said when she privately met with Tulsi Gabbard, she pressed her on that 2017 trip to Syria that came in the wake of a chemical weapons attack carried out by dictator Bashar al-Assad against civilians. Gabbard told her, she said, that she didn't even know she was going to Syria, that she intended to go to Lebanon on the scheduled visit and ended up in Syria. Is that a credible answer?
I talked to Congresswoman Gabbard this week, met with her in my office. We talked about the trip to Syria. She didn't tell me that part. I mean, I think it's kind of unusual that you wind up in one place that wasn't part of the plan. But what concerns me more, especially about that trip, is it was common knowledge that Assad was gassing the civilian population, using chemical weapons against the population multiple times. And she didn't argue about those. But she took the time and the effort to make a case that there were two cases, and she used, experts that were not credible to try to prove that he was not using chemical weapons in those two instances. And I have a hard time understanding why you would want to do that, to use your political capital to try to prove something when there are multiple cases. And, on top of that, when you look at, what in Russia with misinformation, she does seem to have a predilection for misinformation. And for not having, presenting a case that isn't
My
strong
producer's
and
yelling
not
in my
listening
ear. I
to
got
the
to go,
intelligence
Senator. I'm so
community.
sorry to cut you off. But we will see when the hearing gets scheduled. We'll be back in a moment. We go now to Naples, Florida, and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who has a new documentary airing on PBS, Coming to America. It examines how 9 remarkable American immigrants have shaped our country's history. Welcome to Face the Nation.
Good to be with you.
In this documentary, you tell the stories of these individuals who immigrated to the U.S., and they were very accessible, people like Albert Einstein. When you look at Einstein and you look at Henry Kissinger, they were refugees to this country. Donald Trump set refugee admissions at very low levels first term. He's talking about blocking refugee admissions this term. Is that a mistake?
Well, I think we're going through a period of, frankly, reacting to an extraordinarily disastrous immigration policy. So you're going to have some twists and turns. In the long run, we do want to have an ability to allow legitimate refugees to come here. We also, and part of the reason Clist and I made this documentary for PBS, is we really believe strongly that illegal immigrants are a major contribution to America's success and to its exceptional nature. And we want to make sure that, as many Americans favor legal immigration as opposed to illegal immigration. It's very important to distinguish the two, and we want to strongly communicate that legal immigration in a variety of forms, refugees is one, another is various work permits, but we want people to be able to come to America if they do so legally.
You said immigrants inhabit the very soul of what it is to be an American. When you say legitimate refugees, what do you mean?
Well, I think people can stand up and say, I've now decided I'm a refugee, I feel threatened. The question is that true or not? Are they really threatened?
Claim
or in
asylum,
fact, is
you
that
mean?
just their way of getting into the United States? To claim asylum, I think there's a big difference between somebody who genuinely faces a potential loss of life or freedom and somebody who simply wants to come to America and decides to claim that status.
Economic migrants there. Let me ask you, someone else you feature in here, Zalmay Khalilzad, very prominent Afghan American who brokered Trump's deal with the Taliban to exit Afghanistan. As you know, with that chaotic exit, there were tens of thousands of Afghans scattered, some of them still separated from their families. Many of them worked for the U.S. government. Should Mr. Trump extend the legal process of this program and bring those Afghans here? And would you ask Congress to raise the current cap they have on the number of them coming?
I think the Afghan refugees who actively fought on the side of Americans, saved American lives, tried to help win against the Taliban, I think they deserve an unusual level of support and treatment. And I worked all during the period of President Biden's insanely disastrous withdrawal. I tried to work with various people and did podcasts with people who were trying to get folks out of Afghanistan who should legitimately have been helped by the U.S. government. So, when somebody's totally your ally, and this happened with the Vietnamese and the Vietnamese War, when somebody's totally your ally and they risk their lives side by side with you, you shouldn't abandon them. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward rule.
Well, one of the things the Biden administration blamed the Trump administration for was the difficulty in making those fast arrangements to bring those Afghans here. And that's a story for another day. But the person they put their finger on as making it more difficult is Stephen Miller, who is now the top policy advisor to Mr. Trump. He did add new requirements to visas, other things that made it harder to legally come here. Have you spoken to him about some of your concerns?
No, I know Stephen very well. Look, so Stephen was responding to a disastrous level of immigration that's not sustainable. And I think virtually every American agrees you can't have an open border. You can't have Venezuelan gangs, for example, or El Salvadorian gangs. I mean, there are a lot of good reasons, and you're going to get some overreaction, but it's an overreaction, frankly, caused by people like President Biden, who were totally irresponsible in allowing people into this country by the millions in a way that was totally illegal. I mean, it was outside the law.
Okay, pardon me, I don't know if our viewers heard that there was an alarm that went off here, so it interrupted some of what you said there. Donald Trump has chosen your wife, Callista, who helped make this documentary with you, to be the next ambassador to Switzerland. Are you advising the president-elect in any capacity right now?
Well, I chat with him, and I certainly chat with members of the team. I've had a long experience as a Republican activist.
Okay.
And on some things like getting through the tax cut bill, I work with everybody in the House, Senate, and the White House.
Thank you, former Speaker, I should say. Thank you for your time. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.